What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the show. It is the 200th episode. And so I'm going to go through some of the lessons that I've learned in the last 100 episodes. And it'll be from the guests that we've had on the show, my everyday interactions, just in everyday life, but also things from the newsletter and much more. So let's get straight into it. First up is the support challenge matrix. Now, this came from my episode with Professor Mustafa Sakar. A lot of his work that he has done is in resilience in sport. And that, for me, was one of my favorite episodes. It's actually not a coincidence that that episode alone is one of the most popular episodes that we've had on the show. And I think pretty much down to the fact that a lot of people are looking to find where they create resilience from. They're looking to build resilience, whether it's in themselves or even in coaches. Now, Mustafa and his colleague, Tim Fletcher, I'm probably butchering that. I've completely lost that from my mind. But they have both come up with the challenge support matrix. They also came up with the definition of resilience in sport. And this challenge support matrix, when I'd found it, it made so much sense, not only for what I was trying to do with people I work with, but also what I was trying to do in my own life and what I experienced in my own life. Now, what it created was a 4-quadrant matrix where on one axis you had support and on the other axis you had challenge. Now, it gave you 4 environments that you could create in order to try and develop resilience in an individual. The idea was that this was some form of resilience training. Could you create an environment that would develop and nurture resilience? And so what they found was you needed some form of challenge, you needed some form of support. If you had an environment that was low in challenge, low in support, then it was a pretty boring and stagnant environment. Nothing much is going on. If there's any results that happen in there, then it's just kind of by chance. But then if you had an environment that was high in support but low in challenge, then it was a comfortable environment. There's an argument that you might know people that sit in an uncomfortable environment, whether that's for themselves, whether that's what they've created for themselves, or just environments where they're just not really being pushed that hard, but they have tons of support. Or maybe they even have a bit of challenge, but comparatively the support is far bigger. So they sit in a comfortable environment. They don't really develop themselves loads. Then you've got a high challenge, low support environment. That is a relentless environment. Now, I have experienced environments like this, and that is due to the fact that probably the support that I received wasn't necessarily the support I needed, and we'll get onto that in a minute. But ultimately, it's an element of high challenge, but low support. So there's very little support going on, but there's loads of challenge, and that creates a relentless environment. This is where people really feel like they're under pressure. There's high amounts of burnout that can happen in there. And I'm sure there's people around that think I'm in this unrelenting environment. But the environment you want to get into where you can develop the most resilience is a facilitative environment. High challenge, high support. Now, with all of this, it's worth noting what challenge and support looks like. So does challenge look a certain way for you? Maybe your level of challenge is completely different to another person's level of challenge. Maybe someone you're coaching's level of challenge is a different level of challenge to what you might want, or maybe what the person next to them might want. So it's worth knowing what is that level of challenge that they need. Then you've got support. What does support look like? Is it an arm around the shoulder? Or sometimes I like to think of support being maybe an element of accountability. So understanding what that support is. And I think once I was presented with this challenge support matrix, it just kept cropping up, and it still crops up, and it's something I always go back to. And so Mustafa explains it beautifully, and we talk about it load in that episode. And it's been something ever since that episode, and ever since reading a lot of his literature and having spoken to him recently, that I know coaches use it. I know it makes so much sense for not only myself, but other athletes going, yeah, I'm in that environment, or understanding when you fall into certain environments in certain times. So maybe you find yourself in a comfortable environment, you need to add a little bit more challenge. Maybe you're finding it is relentless, the environment you're in. You maybe need to increase the support. Both of those, that understanding of what you're in, can really dictate what you reach out and communicate to, whether it's your coaches or even if you just start to reflect on it yourself and what you want to do. So super valuable in understanding where you sit and the outcomes for it. And the idea is that you build resilience. You build people that can go through challenge because they are supported. And building resilience isn't all about just going through challenging things and just thinking cracking the whip is the way to go about it. It's all about actually supporting people through those challenges. So that's not catching them all the time they have a bump along the way, but it's actually helping them out. So for me, challenge support matrix, it just was one that keeps coming up, and yeah, I love it. All right, up next we have the difference between mistakes and failure. And this didn't come from an episode in the show, but it actually came from me reading a book by Amy Edmondson called The Right Kind of Wrong. And in it, she describes many differences between failure and mistakes, but actually the fact that a mistake is when you make an error, but you knew how to achieve the task. So you've made a mistake, and we can make mistakes, we're all human. But a failure is essentially you creating an error, but not having any prior knowledge in how to achieve that task. And I thought it was a really nice, subtle difference, because many people don't know or see failure and mistakes as the same. And the goal of trying to go after a failure, and basically us seeing that having failures is a part of our growth and our success and developing, but actually knowing that if you're going for something and you fail, there is a difference between you saying, okay, that was a failure or a mistake because I actually knew what to do there, I just didn't do it, and I can be less harsh on myself. But if you created a failure and you didn't know how to do it, then you're just trying to explore something new, and that you can have a little bit more compassion for yourself. So that I found a nice subtle difference in the fact that if something was a mistake, it's just a human act, right? You ultimately don't want to try and make the same mistake twice, but that's hopefully where you learn from your mistakes. But if you see something as a failure, that is a courageous act. That is something because you are going out and seeking something new in the first place. So again, ultimately coming from this place, the whole book is really all about we need to fail in order to improve, and we need to fail in order to move forward. But knowing that, okay, if I keep making these failures or if I keep making these errors, do I have the knowledge of what I'm meant to be doing, or am I implementing it, or do I not? And is that something I'm trying to explore, something new I'm trying to create, right? But in that whole process, just understanding the difference. And I thought it was really, really, really great. So mistakes being you don't have any mistakes being you have prior knowledge of how to achieve a task, and then failure being you don't have prior knowledge of how to achieve that task or whatever it is you're going into. So for me, really cool. Okay, on to the next one. Plan for your tough moments. This came from my conversation with Carla Molinaro, who is 50-kilometer world champion, and a great episode with Carla. Carla's just an amazing follow online as well. You've got to give her that. And she really puts a lot of fun into ultra running, in my opinion. Something that can be so monotonous and boring, she puts a lot of fun into it. But within that episode, she talks about her 50K World Championship race, that she had created her race plan. And she had, more importantly, planned for moments in the race where she was going to come up against some really challenging moments, tough moments. It wasn't necessarily uphill moments. It wasn't necessarily moments where she knew it was going to be like a complicated part of the course. Maybe it was, but actually it was just moments where she knew she needed to either say something or do something in that race to help her get through it. So she pre-planned it. She didn't just turn up to the race and then just be sort of hit in the face when something bad happened. She prepped for when this tough moment was going to come. She's going, I think around about this mark is where I'm going to need it, and that's based off experience. Yes, it might be uphill, it might be a tricky part of the course, or it might just be where I'm starting fatigue and I'm going to need to start to get more fuel on board, or I'm going to say motivational words to myself to get me through. And that's when she just started to implement it into her race. And she said that really helped actually improve her race time. She went off to win it in the first actually. So it didn't just help her race time, she helped her win. But it was the fact that she saw a tough moment ahead and she planned for it. And I thought that, for me, is something that we can implement into loads of parts of our lives. Is there something that we're going into that is a challenge for us? Can we actually start to plan, okay, I think it's going to be pretty tough around about this part. So in that moment, when it gets tough, what am I going to do? Rather than just allowing the tough moment to turn up and then going, what the hell do I do here? And regret what you do. Actually saying, no, I know what I want to do. I know what I'm going to do. And then it's just a case of executing it. And she executed on the day and she became 50-kilometer world champion. So go Carla. She is, again, one of my favorite follows online. So I definitely recommend go check her out. On to the next one. Not all self-talk is created equal. My conversation with Dr. Alexander Lht&x was all around self-talk in sport. And there's loads of different components to self-talk. We talk about what self-talk is. We talk about spontaneous self-talk, goal-directed self-talk. We talk about the tone, the content, the timing, the quality, all different areas of self-talk that you can think of. And it's not just really for sport, but it's very much aimed at it. But it could be thrown into everyday life. It's just really talking about the idea of self-talk and what it's about. It's kind of like a full guide to self-talk. But he mentioned something in the episode that really stuck with me, was the fact that, again, this idea of not all self-talk is created equal. And we think so often that self-talk needs to be just positive. I need to say positive self-talk to myself all the time. But you shouldn't just be thinking of the content of the self-talk. You should be thinking of the outcome of the self-talk. So if the self-talk itself is, say, negative, I'm not having a good day today, I'm playing terribly, but the outcome is that you suddenly say, well, I'm going to try harder and I work harder to achieve the outcome and then start playing better. Was that self-talk bad in the first place? The answer would be no, because the outcome was positive. The opposite could be true as well. You could be having positive self-talk. I'm playing great. I'm feeling confident. This is easy. And then suddenly you start to take your foot off the gas. You become complacent and you allow your opposition to take over. Alexander had done a lot of work in tennis. So he was talking a lot around how that can really swing in tennis matches, even between points, games, sets, that conversation you can be having with yourself can really swing the outcome. So it's really about looking at the outcome of your self-talk. What is my content? What is the quality of my self-talk, rather than just the content that you're saying? Is it positive? Is it negative? It's not really about thinking in positive or negative. It's about, is the outcome positive or negative? That completely changed the way I started to see whether someone I was working with that might be anxious, might be having poor performances, how I addressed their self-talk. If they were just saying, oh, I'm constantly telling myself I'm no good, I was like, okay, well, what's the outcome? And they're like, well, I work a little bit harder. I actually get myself up for the games and then I try to make that statement untrue. Well, the outcome's pretty good. Obviously, if it starts to become a problem where they keep getting negative performances and it really affects them, it really affects their self-worth, then yeah, address it. But ultimately, just look at the outcome and then see, okay, is that self-talk helping them get to that outcome? So yeah, don't jump to conclusions just thinking that all self-talk, all negative self-talk is bad, because as I mentioned, not all self-talk is created equal. All right, next one is be adaptable and not perfect. I had the great opportunity of speaking to Dr. Gordon Flett, who is, in my opinion, one of the godfathers of perfectionism, especially in the sports literature. And he was then talking in the episode around this idea of being a rigid perfectionist or an adaptable perfectionist. It was essentially presenting the option of being, do you want to be rigid or adaptable? And this really resonated with me, because he was saying that a rigid perfectionist would be someone who, and again, this example hit me right in the chest, was you want to go for a run, right? You put it in your schedule. I want to go for a run. I want to go out there to improve my cardiovascular, to improve my fitness. And it's in my schedule to do it. But outside, it is raining, it's sleeting, it's snowing, it's torrential weather, there's a snowstorm, whatever it might be, a blizzard is outside. A rigid perfectionist would not be able to let go of that schedule and would, regardless, go out there in the rain, in the snow, in that storm and get that run done, even though it is not wise to do that. They just cannot let it go. They wouldn't even go on the treadmill inside or something like that and have a compromise. It's about being so rigid in those high standards that you have that you cannot let them go. And for me, that's something that I did. It was something that I found that I just constantly did, where if something was in my schedule, I couldn't let it go. I've been to the gym at like 1 a.m. before because I could not sleep until I knew I'd got that session done. And so I became really rigid in my perfectionism, in my standards, in my behaviors. But then he presented this idea of being an adaptable perfectionist. Can you adapt it? Can you still have those high standards? Can you still adapt to it? And this again was just presenting this idea. Would you rather be perfect or adaptable. Now, if you say, oh, it'd be great to be perfect, you got to remind yourself that that is only working in certain conditions. It's rigid, it's fixed. Being perfect only works in certain moments. Now, to be an elite athlete and to be a great one, you've got to be adaptable. You've got to go on to different conditions. If, say, you're a tennis player, again, you have different surfaces. You've got to adapt different surfaces. You've got to adapt to the opponent that's in front of you. Being perfect means that you only work in one scenario. So why strive for being perfect when you can strive for being adaptable? And so I thought it was a really good idea in presenting that to you, in the sense that, do you want to be adaptable or do you want to be perfect? Because yes, you can aim for perfection and be rigid in that perfectionism, but it's only going to work in certain scenarios. It's going to really frustrate you when it doesn't work and when you're potentially up against it, and when you needed to be adaptable, you're not willing to change what you're doing. So try to be adaptable. It's something that I know I'm trying to do more of, especially with, if you do listen to the show, I am a recovering perfectionist, and that for me is something that I'm learning to let go of and try to be more adaptable, because it does open up more doors. All right, next one is kind of moving on from that. When I had Patrick Goudreau on the show, when we spoke about his model of excellencism, and this was providing a different model to perfectionism, and ultimately just saying to strive for excellence and not perfection. And it really takes out all of the maladaptive, the perfectionistic concerns that come from being a perfectionist. So it's all of the negative things that essentially are happening if you are a perfectionist, such as you need to be really organized in order to get something done, right? You doubt your actions, you procrastinate loads, you fear failure, you have concerns over the mistakes you're going to make, all of that because you're striving for perfection. You have such high standards and you're unwilling to compromise on them. But excellencism says, let's shoot for excellence. Let's not just shoot for perfection. Let's not shoot for perfection. Let's shoot for excellence. And within that, it's messy, it's adaptable, it's different, but it's still having high standards. It's still being driven. It's still being motivated, but it's just recognizing that we do need to make mistakes. We are going to have doubts over actions. We are going to have some of these negative things that happen, but we're not shooting for such a perfect level of performance. And so when we don't shoot for perfect, we don't have some of these doubts. We don't have some of these fears of failures, the concerns over mistakes, because we're accepting that whatever's coming there's going to be some of that along the way. And ultimately, for me, it was really a bit about a mindset shift. It was about, okay, I'm really going to have to look at essentially what Jordan Peterson says is about lowering your expectations, but not lowering, but still aiming up. Okay, so we lower our aim, but we just aim up. And that might sound bad to lower your expectations, but if you're still aiming up, it just means that you can take one step and then you can go to the next one, to the next one. It seems more achievable. It seems less daunting. Sometimes perfectionists set such high standards that that step seems so out of reach that you don't even want to take that step in the first place. So lower those expectations, aim up, and then take that first step towards excellence rather than perfection. So yeah, that was one for me. All right, on to the next one, which is emotions aren't bad, it's how you use them. I can't actually remember where I heard this. I think it was a podcast somewhere, but then I marinated on it myself, and it was then made me reflect on an episode with Maggie Murphy where she had talked about turning anger into passion. And if you listen to that episode where she talks about taking over Lewis Football Club and building that football club up as the CEO there, she took anger and emotion and turned it into passion, something positive. And then this idea of that emotions aren't bad. So having an emotion like anger, emotion itself isn't bad. It's what you do with it. So anger isn't a bad emotion. It's how you act on it. If you turn anger into inspiration, passion, and motivation towards doing good, was that emotion bad in the first place? No. It just means that it motivated and drove you towards doing good things. But if that anger is used in the wrong way and used towards violence, hurting other people, that's where it becomes bad. So any emotion is just something you're feeling, and it's how you use it. If you are feeling anxious, right, that emotion in itself is not bad. It's a natural thing to have. But what you do with it really defines the next part of you, defines who you are, your character. Do I just wallow in that anxiety? Do I not do anything about it? A lot of the conversations I've been having with people around mental health, for example, are that it's, yes, great to talk about mental health, but up to an extent where you then start to do something about it. And in my opinion and my work, and especially things like the app, we talk about building mental strength, actually going and taking the action to build your mental strength. And the default and the byproduct is that you have good mental health. So the emotions that you feel, totally natural. What you do with them, the actions that are created from them, even more important. So using your emotions to benefit you, even if they are seen as negative emotions, anger, anxiety, jealousy, whatever it might be, envy, any emotion that you're feeling, you can use it, but you can use it in a positive way if you just give yourself the chance to feel that emotion, to just sit with it, understand it. And this has been, again, if you're someone that's watched the show, you understand that I took the plunge into therapy in the last 6 months. And for me, literally one of the goals that I had through therapy was to feel my emotions more, was to allow myself to feel it. So in my meditation practices was to recognize when an emotion came up and then to sit with it and understand it and think, where's that come from? What's it trying to tell me? What is the story behind that emotion? And am I using it in the right way? Am I allowing the emotion to use me? Am I being changed by this emotion? So understanding that feeling that emotion isn't a bad thing and trying to push it away isn't the right thing. It's not the bad thing. The emotion is not the bad thing. It's just, what are you doing with it? How are you using it? How is it showing up in your life? What is it creating for you? And then can you be conscious and mindful enough to use it in the way that you want? And this can be all about, okay, what character do I want to be? What character do I want to have moving forward? Do I want to be someone that is motivated to turn these emotions and reframe them, negative situations, into positive ones, and do things like that? You can be driven by your character. Your character can guide you in that way. So how you view emotions, how you deal with them. Are you someone that uses anger and vengeance and turns it into something negative? And is that the character you really want to be? Up to you. But can you create this character in the future and then use that to guide you when you feel these emotions, how you use them? What would that character do with those emotions? So if you don't feel you know right now what you would do, think of it like that. What would my future self that I want to be do with these emotions? So yeah, emotions aren't bad. It's just how you use them. All right, next up, surround yourself with people that are better than you. This was Roger Black who said this. So former Olympian Roger Black spoke about he surrounded himself with people that were better than him. And I 100% back this up. My main reason that I got to being a professional cricketer and a professional athlete was down to the fact that I surrounded myself with people that were way better than me. I had no interest in being the best athlete in the room. I think someone first told me that you don't want to be the best skier in a ski group. You don't want to be the first one down the mountain. You want to be the one that everyone's waiting for, because you want to know that you're on a tough enough slope that you take a little bit longer to learn it, but then you can actually catch up. The idea is similar to being a big fish in a small pond, right? You don't want to surround yourself with people that make you constantly look better, especially at a young age. If you're a young athlete, you need to surround yourself with people that are better than you, constantly push yourself to just see where you're at. If you can have some level of success in groups of people that are a little bit older than you, that is a far bigger win than dominating an age group that you're in. So if you're 14 years old, can you play with 16, 17, maybe 18-year-olds and do slightly well in there and hold your own, rather than play at your own age group and just dominate and wipe the floor with everyone? Because eventually when everyone grows up and everyone starts to even out and maybe some people drop off, you'll find that quickly catches up with you. And if you haven't surrounded yourself with people better than you and constantly built yourself into a mindset of looking to always improve, you will eventually get caught up with, and you could maybe even fall behind. So I know that even now in my life, just as a fully fledged adult, or maybe trying to be a fully fledged adult, I am still trying to surround myself with people that make me better. Right? So trying to find people that If they've got a skill set that I'd like to take on, I want to be around them. If there's people that I want to learn off, that I find have got more knowledge than me, it's pretty much why this podcast exists, because I can get people that have got more knowledge than me, and I can surround myself with people that are better than me, and I can learn off them. I can try to understand how to get there, or maybe the knowledge that I need to do, I need to have to get there. And if it's sport, then being around people that have got better skills than me. In my physical training, for example, I've started to follow different people online to change my training programs. I'm doing a big hypertrophy thing. So I looked at Dr. Mike Israetel and the work that he does and just went straight onto that. So people that are better than you, surround yourself. Whatever stage you're at, just constantly look for those people. And if you don't, then try to find them in your everyday life and see if they're showing up. And maybe it might be getting rid of some people, right? It might be just removing them. And that's why podcasts are great. Hopefully, if you listen to this show, that's because you're looking for people that maybe are better than you, you've got some different skill sets than you, some knowledge, all those sorts of things. But ultimately, you are the 5 people that you surround yourself. You are the sum of the 5 people you surround yourself with. And you maybe are the sum of the 5 podcasts that you're listening to, or the 5 shows that you're watching on TV, or the content that you're digesting, and the accounts you most follow on social media. It's really about what you're surrounding yourself. Is it going in the direction that you want to be going in, or is it tearing you down to a level that you don't want to be at? Something to consider. All right, on to the next one, which is you cannot live a normal life if you are elite. And this isn't a elitist statement. This is about being an elite athlete. If you want to be exceptional in something, you are going to have to live a slightly different life to other people. Aaron Walsh, a mental performance coach, spoke about this on the episode that I did with him. And we were talking around that when you ultimately say to yourself, I want to be a professional athlete, I want to be excellent at this, the cost of entry at the door is you are not signing up to a normal life. You can't, or in my opinion, you really shouldn't be having the same life as everyone else, because that is an indicator that you are not going in the direction away from what everyone else is doing. And that for me is something I'm always looking out for. It's not a case of sort of zigging when everyone else is zagging and swimming upstream just for the sake of it, but it's just looking out for those indicators of, am I doing what everyone else is doing? Am I potentially trying to live like everyone else? And this is a really big thing in the world we live in right now. I didn't really have this so much. I'm 34 years old. I didn't really have this so much before, when I was sort of in my 16s to maybe 20, because social media wasn't constantly presenting me with a version of myself that I felt I needed to be like, which is this comparison trap that we fall into online, or just the FOMO effect, right? Just constantly fear of missing out and needing to fit in. And so we shapeshift ourselves into being like everyone else. But in that process of doing that, we actually move away from the thing that we want the most, which is trying to stand out and trying to be excellent, trying to do something that no one else has ever done. So if you are kind of living that normal life, if you're doing the things that everyone else is doing, don't be surprised if you're getting the results that everyone else is getting, because you are not paying that price of not living a normal life. And it sounds harsh to say that, and I know there's some people that sit in the space of saying that we need to be more considerate of being an elite athlete and being excellent and being a high achiever, that you risk burnout and you risk all these maladaptive behaviors and outcomes that come from it. But sometimes that is a little bit of the cost, a little bit more anxiety, a little bit more self-doubt, a little bit less self-compassion can sometimes be that cost that you have in order to go and do great things, in order to go and be driven to go and achieve something great. But that doesn't mean you can't have things around you to remind you that those things are important and that you should not burn yourself out. You should not have self-compassion. You should not have mechanisms in place for self-care on yourself, right? Whatever that looks like. It's just recognizing that, okay, there are going to be more moments where I feel like this. There are going to be more moments where this is just going to suck. And I've got to be brave enough and courageous enough to just take that on. And rather than thinking I want to avoid them and try and be safe, where nothing will happen, then yeah, if you only are constantly trying to run from that and trying to be like everyone else, just don't be surprised if you don't achieve those great things. So recognize you can't live a normal life if you want to be elite, if you want to be excellent. That's a big one for me, one I can't stress enough, really. All right, on to the last one, trusting your decisions. This I mentioned in a recent episode with Peter Hurley, that it's something I've been thinking about quite a lot. And it is something that I've been thinking about probably for the last year or so. I had an episode with Lht&x, surfer from Barbados. Chelsea was awesome. And it also came up in my conversation with Ben O'Keefe. And Chelsea was really talking about it from a surfer's perspective, that trusting your decisions is something you just kind of have to do as a surfer. You see a wave, you think it's the right one, you trust your intuition that the experiences you've had on the water, the feel you've had on the water, that the decision of going for that wave is the right one to take, and then to just go for it, that you just have to jump on and make the most of that wave. Ben O'Keefe talking about trusting in your decisions, the intuition of your field, the experience you've had when he was out on the field as a World Cup referee in rugby, really backing the decisions that you've made. And for me, it's something that, if I'm honest, I have lacked in my life a little bit. I felt like decisions I've made, I don't necessarily always trust them, and I don't always know if I'm making the right decision. I just kind of jump into it and hope for the best, and I've continuously done that. And so I think the thing I'm trying to let go of is the idea of the kind of what if syndrome that comes from decisions. Like, what if I'd made that decision? What if I'd done something slightly different? Would my life be better? And again, it was Jordan Peterson that I listened to, where he spoke about your life is this endless divergence of paths that you take, and you just take the next path, see where that goes, and then there'll be a divergence in that path, and then you just take the one you think is the right one, and that is your life. Your life is this endless, constant divergence of paths and decisions that you make, and you just see where you end up, but trying not to regret whether I was to take that path. What was I to do there? It's what path are you on now, and you can't change that. You just have to make the most of that path that you're on, this decision. So in the context of a surfer, you have to trust the decision you've made. You have to trust that the wave you've gone onto is the right wave, and making the most of it when you're on it to get the best experience, to get the most enjoyment, maybe the best result, is then about being present and being on that decision and just riding it and going for it. And I found there was a really great blog by Sahil Bloom, where he wrote about the surfer's mentality, and he wrote this section of it that I absolutely loved, which said, the surfer knows that they don't have to ride every single wave that comes their way. They have the freedom and the power to choose which waves to take and which waves to let pass by. The surfer knows that 90% of the time they won't be riding any wave, but just paddling and waiting. They know that sometimes there will be long, painful periods between the waves, sometimes so long that they may start to wonder whether there will ever be a good wave again. They are aware that patience and proper positioning is all that matters for when the next wave inevitably comes. The surfer knows that the only way to live is by putting themselves out there on the water. You cannot catch any waves sitting on the shore. There's always a risk of getting crushed by a wave, but the rewards are worth it. The surfer knows that sometimes a wave will crash down on them and hold them underwater. They know that they may come up for air only to be hit by another wave crashing down. They are able to weather these hits with a stoic awareness that remains fluid and will serve them better than stiffening to fight the waves. I felt this was such a great little blog that was created, and some unbelievable lessons from it, and just the idea of essentially riding waves where you're in. And I kind of feel right now that the period of my life that I'm in is that I've had some bad waves before and I've ridden them, and now I kind of feel I'm riding a little bit of a good wave. I feel there's maybe a wave building and I'm starting to ride that, and having something like this and trusting that I'm on the right path. Because before, I think in decisions that I've made and decisions that I've thought I was making, and whether I was going down the right path, ever since I retired from professional cricket, I wasn't sure. and I was maybe second guessing myself, and I don't think I fully committed to being on that wave and where I am. And I feel like I'm starting to do that now. So those are some of the lessons that I've had, and I'm really excited for where the podcast is right now. If you are a listener of the show, whether you're new, old, however long you've been listening, I really appreciate you being here. I love making the show. I'm really excited for where I'm taking it. I think I'm starting to find my groove of how I want the show to be, the people I want to talk to, what I'm positioning, how I want to go about it. And yeah, we've got some good guests that I'm speaking to, want to get on the show, but it is all down to people that listen, just showing that support, whether it's liking an episode, sending in an email, or just even subscribing, just following, hitting the follow button on whatever platform you're listening on. I can't exaggerate how much that makes a difference, and just tuning in, listening to the episodes. And I've been so surprised. I never really thought I'd get to 200 episodes. I didn't really think it would go this far. I was consistent. I've been consistent. There's been times where I've fallen off because it can just be overwhelming with trying to do that, grow your business. But I've now found that there are things that have come into my life through this show, even though it may not have the listeners of some of the great shows out there, or the listener numbers, I mean, not the quality of listeners. It's the fact that I meet people, and I think one of the coolest moments I ever had was I was in an airport elevator, and a young kid ran into the elevator and was with his parents and was kind of looking at me. He had some sport kit on. He was kind of looking at me in the corner, and then as the elevator got down to the level we were on and the doors opened, he went, "See you, Lewis." And I was kind of like, whoa, how do you know me? I've never met you before. And he just like, "Yeah, I listened to the show." And I jumped out the elevator and just said, "Hey, thank you so much. Like, what are you doing?" He was in some sport kit. He was telling me he was off to go to a tour. And just that little engagement really made my day, because you don't necessarily know who's listening. You don't know the amount of people that are always listening or the impact that it's having. And I've had things that have turned up in my life, and people have quoted things that I've said from the podcast, or maybe guests that they've listened to. I really enjoyed that. People flick me text messages saying, "I've just listened to this episode." And it means the world to me when I hear stuff like that it's actually had an impact. And not only whether it's their life, or it might be a parent, change their thinking. And I'm super grateful for that. So things like that really inspire me to just continue going and finding people to talk to, whether it's from a selfish perspective to try and educate myself. But I know through doing that process, I'm educating listeners, and you're getting interesting episodes to listen to. So yeah, loads of people on the horizon that I want to be talking to, that we're going to line up some episodes with. And I think I'm now starting to find that groove of what the show is going to look like, and it will no doubt evolve. And maybe when we hit 300 episodes and I'm doing this all again, I'll be reflecting back and going, "Wow, I can't believe I did the show like that." And we'll see where it goes. But yeah, super excited. And those are just some of the lessons that I've learned in the last 100 episodes. And hopefully it was helpful for you. And as always, reach out. Let me know if there's something that you've learned in the last 100 episodes. You can do that on all social media channels. Email me, whatever it is. But that's all we've got for this episode. Thank you, and I'll see you next time. If you've enjoyed this episode, then we've created a playlist of some of the best episodes to start with. All you got to do, head right here. Go on. Go.